In 1968, Garrett Hardin published his standout piece, Tragedy of the Commons, in which he painted a picture of herders' cows in a common pasture. In this theoretical pasture, every herdsman tries to maximize their gain. He argues it is in the herdsman's best interest to add more to his herd. He concluded that the inherent logic of the commons remorselessly generates tragedy. Since the publication of this piece, Hardin's idea of the commons as leading to inevitable tragedy has continually been disproven. What he missed was the fact that social groups are very capable of designing and utilizing mechanisms to allocate use rights among members. The FOSS movement is just one of the many instances that demonstrates how property is about management and not just the material resource. For Hardin, the natural order is such that resource degradation is inevitable in cases of common property. Dr. Tarek Loubani says, fuck the natural order. For Loubani, the commons is a tool of resistance. The commons, in the form of free software and hardware, is the potential to bring national sovereignty to Gaza. Before we can get into how exactly this is possible, we need to understand how free software and hardware acts as a commons. To begin understanding what FOSS is, we'll start from a purely mechanical sense. Generally today, something is considered free software if it has the following 4 freedoms. 1, the freedom to run the program as you wish, for any purpose. 2, the freedom to study the program and change it. 3, the freedom to redistribute copies. And 4, the freedom to redistribute copies of even modified versions. The key to all this is that the source code needs to be readily available. In addition to the criteria outlined above, there is a more ethical and moral aspect of the movement that has been articulated in many forms at different points in time. The preamble to the GNU General Public License, a series of free software licenses, is one particularly significant example of this. Within the licensing of this software, it explicitly states, when we speak of free software, we are referring to freedom, not price. So while this movement is certainly grounded in physical material technology, it is just as much grounded in a vision of liberalism, dedicating itself to freedom and free speech rights. This, we know, is a recurring theme within the relationships between hacking and liberalism. As with any term, the terms free software and open source each have their own particular histories. While colloquially, these two terms tend to be used interchangeably, upon further glance, it is evident that each has its own emphases and nuances. The term free software originated with Richard Stallman in the 1970s, primarily as a way to promote freedom in reaction to proprietary software hoarding. Stallman emphasized the freedom aspect, as in the value of your rights to run free software. For Stallman, free software was an entire social and moral philosophy, and his emphasis has not been lost to time. On the other hand, open source, as a term, emphasizes the development model of FOSS, where software is collaboratively created via the volunteer labor of strangers. This term is considered a bit more pragmatic, talking directly about the code in the program, and ultimately emphasizing the fact that we can have better software via this development model. Together, these terms can be understood as having established not just common property, but a space which can be understood as the commons, where essentially the whole FOSS community is enabled to benefit from any alterations. Rather than depletion and tragedy, this space results in the creation of better software. Though we are speaking of the commons, in an effort to avoid the fundamental mistake committed by Hardin, we must not assume this space is self-regulating. Rather, the FOSS movement has been deliberately crafted via the decisions and directives made by those who have led it. If we look to Ian Murdoch's management of Debian, Murdoch epitomized the idea that the key to the commons is about management and not just the material resource. In the world of FOSS, management has been integral to establishing and maintaining the commons and the community within.
Ian Murdoch decided early on to implement frameworks for quality collaboration, thereby helping create the commons. Ian Murdoch's major contribution to free and open source system development techniques was Debian's packaging system. This package management system was far more effective than past systems, for everything was bundled together, thereby enabling developers to simply click a button to have software installed or removed. Further, this system allowed developers to install and upgrade software seamlessly over the network, allowing for distributed development. This is more than just a packaging system, but rather an entire managerial approach that is incorporated in the policy still alive in Debian today. As Murdoch himself said, the package system was not designed to manage software, it was designed to facilitate collaboration. Today's developers at Debian have continued to implement similar techniques and protocols. Among these is Debian's new maintainer process. This is an entrance exam designed to test new developers' knowledge on technical, legal, and ethical matters prior to their enrollment in the project. This exam remains a way for Debian to state and maintain their commitment to the greater OSS population. The exam is a gatekeeper to anyone who wants to join the project and is used to ensure everyone within the project shares the same values. Thus, the exam reinforces Debian as an autonomous community of developers and a commons for innovation and development. Debian's ability to retain moral values and achieve such a high degree of technical success stands out, for it is normally hard for these aspects to coexist in any field. Murdoch and his managerial approach motivated participants to collaborate in a culture where technologies tend to be individualistic. It is here that we draw a straight line from the management technique of the commons to the community that developed within the commons. Once again, the key to the commons is the management of the commons. Murdoch fostered within Debian a generalized culture of sharing and responsibility via his leadership style and commitment to explicitly defining the obligations of Debian via a slew of documents, including an Agile manifesto. It was Murdoch who began the tradition of explicitly voicing projects' commitments, and his contribution was essential to Debian, but it was also essential to the OSS movement as a whole. The manifesto created by Murdoch lasted long after him, for the developers followed this mindset and instituted legal principles and admissible licenses. This created the Debian Free Software Guidelines, which outline commitments to the broader OSS community via their social contract. Due to the speed at which Debian was growing, it was hugely important at the time to build up the community while maintaining established shared values. With a larger group, the developers needed to understand the expectations of the social contract and the new maintainer process. Rife with social and ethical protocols, Debian transcends from being just a technical project with excellent products to a miniature society with a social contract and constitution. Ultimately, Debian was developed by the community of developers for the community of developers. With this, Ian Murdoch left Debian after 3 years. Murdoch argued that this was a final test to whether or not Debian could succeed, for this was the only way to know if the project has taken on a life of its own.
Knowing what we know now about FOSS and how management of FOSS can enable a commons, perhaps we can begin to understand how the commons could act as a tool of resistance. The commons, understood as the democratization of information technology, seen through free and open source software and hardware movement, has the potential to bring national sovereignty to Gaza. For Palestinians under occupation, Tarek Libani believes promoting infrastructural level national strategies for the production of open source hardware will make Palestine a more sovereign place. As Libani emphasizes, there's one thing you can't be dispossessed of: your knowledge. We must ask ourselves, why should it not be available to all? This is as much about freedom as it is about what system functions best to create the best versions of software possible.